Alright, so we're gonna do another wiki chasing study, one of my favorite things. Um, but before I get to the meat of what I want to talk about, which is Marxism, I'm gonna read a few peripheral uh, readings on it. The first one we're gonna look at is the Economic Times uh, and their definition of what is Marxism. Then we're gonna check out some Britannica posts, and we're going to read a bit of the manifesto of the Communist Party, and then carry on with the wiki read of Marxism. We won't read all of this manifesto, just probably the first few pages of it, just to get a pretty basic idea. I want everybody that watches this and most of my videos to do, walk away with a baseline understanding of the topics at least. Um, so I know almost nothing about Marxism outside of the left-right political structure that America follows today. So we're going to go over some of this. So the Economic Times, August 22nd, 2023. So this was actually in today's paper. That's pretty crazy. What is Marxism? Marxism is one of the most significant theories and a philosophy that has contributed much to the modern world. German philosopher Karl Marx helped the working class to question the injustice enforced upon them through their wages, lifestyle, and oppression. Marxism, for many, is a beginning of progress and evolution. Marx believed that instilling his ideology in the minds of people like him would one day make the world an ideal classless society. But what is Marxism? Marxism is a social, economic, and political philosophy that analyzes the impact of the ruling class on the laborers, leading to uneven distribution of wealth and privileges in the society. It stimulates the workers to protest the injustice. The theory was formulated by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in their work The Communist Manifesto. It was a pamphlet they created during the age of imperialism, rooting from their own struggles as members of the proletariat lot. So we've got a definition right here of the proletariat, known as the lowest or one of the lowest economic and social classes in a society. I would be an example of somebody within the proletariat class. In ancient Rome, the proletariat consisted of the poor landless freemen. It included artisans and small tradesmen who had been gradually impoverished by the extension of slavery. The proletariat literally meaning producers of offspring. Well, perhaps I have one child, but that's it. It was the lowest rank among Roman citizens. The first recognition of its status was traditionally ascribed to the Roman king Servius Tullius. In some periods of Roman history, it played an important role, not as an independent force, but as a mass following in the political struggles between the Roman patricians and the wealthy plebeians. I thought the plebeians were the poor, and that's where we got the word pleb. Let's check it out. Plebeian, also plebeian, or Latin plebs, plural plebes, member of the general citizenry in ancient Rome. Okay, so your normies, you plebs, as opposed to the privileged patrician class. What is a patrician? Patrician, or Latin patricus, or patrici, Any member of a group of citizen families who, in contrast with the plebeians, formed a privileged class in early Rome. The origins of the class remain obscure, but the patricians were probably leaders of the more important families or clans who formed the major part, if not all, of the Senate of the primitive period, as well as the families from whom were drawn the most distinguished part of the early cavalry. They constituted an early nobility of birth. Alright, so the patricians are the nobles, the plebeians are kind of the normie class, the middle class, the everyday Joes, and then the proletarian is the peasants, in a way. So most people uh, fall into this category, and it goes all the way back to ancient Rome. Interesting. In the theory of Karl Marx, the term proletariat designated the class of wage workers who were engaged in industrial production and whose chief source of income was derived from the sale of their labor power. As an economic category, it was distinguished in Marxian literature from the poor, the working classes, and the or lumpen proletariat because of its subordinate position in a capitalist society and the effects of periodic depressions on wages and employment. The proletariat, as described by Marxists, was usually living in poverty. What is this word? Lumpenproletariat. Also Rabelproletariat in German. According to Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto, the lowest stratum of the industrial working class included also such undesirables as tramps and criminals. The members of the Lumpenproletariat, this social scum, said Marx, are not only disinclined to participate in revolutionary activities with their rightful brethren, the proletariat, but also tend to act as the bribed tools of reactionary intrigue. Interesting. So let's look at a classless society. In Marxism, the ultimate condition of social organization expected to occur when true communism is achieved. According to Karl Marx, the primary function of the state is to repress the lower class of society in the interests of the ruling class. However, after the class struggle has resulted in the victory of the proletariat and the establishment of a socialist society, there will be no further need for such a repressive institution. With the disappearance of classes, the state is expected to wither away. So this classless society is kind of a theoretical concept that the state tries to rule over the proletariats or the peasants, and then the peasants aren't having it, and they overthrow the state, and then have socialism for a little while, and then it just crumbles anyway. So let's see. According to Marx, history demonstrates the existence of class struggle centuries earlier. He explains the struggle through 5 stages. Primitive communism is the age of hunter-gatherers where every human was treated equally, hence there was an absence of class. The age of slavery, where there was a class distinction between the aristocrats and the slaves. Feudalism, where the struggle was between landlords, owners, and the people who rented or used their lands for agriculture. Capitalism is where the labor community, the proletariat, worked their lives off only for the ruling class or the bourgeoisie to profit from them. This is the stage where Marx and Engels compile Communist Manifesto from their plight as workers for the British factory owners. Socialism is the phase that Marx believed the proletariats would revolt for their injustice and eventually form a communist society free of class distinctions and equal wealth. So communist China, that's not really what they have going on over there. They have more like an imperial totalitarian dictatorship, do they not? Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but communism seems to be where everyone's kind of on equal ground and they all work together for the common good of your fellow man, and everybody benefits equally in like manner. Anyway, the key principles of Marxism. There are two obvious divisions in the capitalist society, the bourgeoisie and the proletarians. The exploitation of the latter is the essence of Marxist ideology. The bourgeoisie enjoyed the power to control the toiling masses' wage and work, leaving them vulnerable to even replacements in the future. The former had access to modern equipment and tools to make work easier and quicker, leaving the laborer with low wages and adding more profits to themselves. The never-ending heavy labor left the workforce with a feeling of alienation from the task, estranged labor, and even humanity, focusing only on the yields. The capitalists use every medium, be it religious, educational, or financial, to its favor to maintain power. This means every action and need of the laborers are dependent on the power of the capitalists. Capitalism made a man prioritize money over love and other emotions. Karl Marx calls this false consciousness, where people are made to believe money and materials are the ultimate goal. That's pretty well what we've got today with this hustle culture, bruh. Hustle, bruh. You gotta get on that grind, bruh. You gotta get on your grind, bruh. What are you doing, bruh? Get on the hustle train. Woo woo. Okay. Such inequalities will eventually infuriate the proletariats and lead them to a revolution in the view of abolishing capitalism. The outcome of the retaliation, according to Marx, would be a classless and equal society. Until that also crumbles. Marxism, Socialism, and Communism. The three terms often cause confusion among people, though they are similar in some of their views. Marxism, along with Socialism and Communism, were formulated to put an end to the capitalist ideologies. Socialism insists on common ownership of wealth and land, while still allowing individuals to own assets privately. The main idea of this philosophy is to ensure equal distribution of wealth and reward people based on the level of contribution an individual extends to the economy of the country, whereas communism means the absence of private property. It insists the control of such assets be in only the hands of the government. The government shall provide the people with all the necessities like education, medical aids, and housing. It's kind of reminiscent of this idea of you'll own nothing and be happy, and you will eat the bugs. Though an absolute socialist or communist country or democracy is still impossible, some countries have managed to set up such governments using maximum efforts. Some of the countries that follow communism are China, Cuba, and North Korea. And I can't imagine living there, it must be miserable. And the most socialist countries are Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. I haven't really heard any negative things about living in either of those countries. Everything seems alright with socialism, maybe. But I guess it was one of those things where you'd have to live there for a while to really understand. Criticisms on Marxism theory. There have always been debates and controversies around Marxism. Experts criticize the state of a certain principles of Marx not coming true. For example, there has been no socialist revolution against the capitalist community as Marx predicted. In fact, the new countries that did face socialist protests were still poor and not capitalist countries as Marx expected. Karl Marx also stated that more and more competitions in the industries would lead to unemployment. But on the contrary, there are surplus workforce to fulfill the competitions. They have only been advantageous in widening the employment opportunities. I don't fully agree with that statement. It's harder than ever to find a job, and it's even more difficult to keep it these days. And, you know, prospecting for work and going to interviews, dozens of them in some cases, and never being called back for a second interview or offered any position, and being trailed along for weeks at a time, only to get slapped later with a sorry, we've moved on with somebody else notification. It really starts to make you wonder. Regardless of the criticism that the philosophy has been receiving, there is truth to it. Marxism has definitely made us think and question more on what we deserve and what we receive. What are Marxism examples? The work scenario where the laborers earn in peanuts, whereas the owner of the same organization takes the profit without investing much of his manual efforts, as an example of theories dealt in Marxism definition. Why is Marxism important in modern world? Where did they get their editor, and how come he's not very good at grammar? Marxism theory encourages one to question the ideologies of a capitalistic society and understand the link between what we deserve and what we receive as rewards for our labor. What is Marxism? Leninism? Leninism? Marxism-Leninism is a Vladimir Lenin's version of Marxism that led him to a revolt against Russian capitalism. Though the ideology was formed by neither of them, it became popular after the death of Lenin. What is Neo-Marxism? Neo-Marxism is a development of Marxist ideologies combined with those of Max Weber, considering the changes of the 20th century society. What is the difference between Marxism and communism? Simply put, Marxism is a theory and an ideology, whereas communism is an implementation of Marxist ideologies in a political system. Alrighty, let's take a brief look at the Communist Manifesto. A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this specter. Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Guizot, French radicals and German police spies. Where is the party in opposition that has not been decried as a communistic by its opponents in power? Where is the opposition that has not hurled back the branding reproach of communism against the more advanced opposition parties, as well as against its reactionary adversaries? Two things result from this fact. Communism is already acknowledged by all European powers to be itself a power. It is high time that communists should openly, in the face of the whole world, publish their views, their aims, their tendencies, and meet this nursery tale of the specter of communism with a manifesto of the party itself. To this end, communists of various nationalities have assembled in London and sketched the following manifesto, to be published in the English, French, German, Italian, Flemish, and Danish languages. The bourgeois, or the bougie, the bourgeois, and the proletarians. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed, stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight, a fight that each time ended either in a revolutionary reconstitution of society at large or in the common ruin of the contending classes. In the earlier epochs of history, we find almost everywhere that a complicated arrangement of society into various orders, a manifold gradation of social rank, and in ancient Rome, we have patricians, knights, plebeians, slaves. In the Middle Ages, feudal lords, vassals, and guildmasters, journeymen, apprentices, serfs. In almost all of these classes, again, subordinate gradations. In the modern bougie society that has sprouted from the ruins of feudal society has not done away with class antagonisms. It has but established new classes, new conditions of impression or oppression, new forms of struggle in place of the old ones. Our epoch, the epoch of bourgeoisie, possesses, however, this distinct feature. It has simplified class antagonisms. Society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other, bourgeoisie and proletariat. From the serfs of the Middle Ages sprang the chartered burghers of the earliest towns. From these burgesses, the first elements of the bourgeoisie were developed. The discovery of America, the rounding of the Cape, opened up fresh ground for the rising bourgeoisie. The East Indian and Chinese markets, the colonization of America, trade with the colonies, the increase in the means of exchange and in commodities generally gave to commerce, to navigation, to industry, an impulse never before known, and thereby to the revolutionary element in the tottering feudal society a rapid development. The feudal system of industry, in which industrial production was monopolized by closed guilds, now no longer sufficed for the growing wants of the new markets. The manufacturing system took its place. The guildmasters were pushed on one side by the manufacturing middle class. Division of labor between the different corporate guilds vanished in the face of division of labor in each single workshop. Meantime, the markets kept ever growing, the demand ever rising, even manufacture no longer sufficed. Thereupon, steam and machinery revolutionized industrial production. The place of manufacture was taken by the giant, modern industry, the place of the industrial middle class by industrial millionaires, the leaders of the whole industrial armies, the modern bougie. That's a very funny word. Sorry, I've had a head cold and I just got congestion in my head. Modern industry has established the world market for which the discovery of America paved the way. This market has given an immense development to commerce, to navigation, to communication by land. This development has, in its turn, reacted on the extension of industry, and in proportion as industry, commerce, navigation, railways extended, in the same proportion the bourgeoisie developed, increased its capital, and pushed into the background every class handed down from the Middle Ages. We see, therefore, how the modern bourgeoisie itself, or is itself, the product of a long course of development, of a series of revolutions in the modes of production and of exchange. Each step in the development of the bourgeoisie was accompanied by a corresponding political advance of that class. An oppressed class under the sway of the feudal nobility, an armed and self-governing association in the medieval commune, here independent urban republic as in Italy and Germany, their taxable third estate of the monarchy as in France, afterwards in the period of manufacturing proper, serving either the semi-feudal or the absolute monarchy as a counterpoise against the nobility, and, in fact, cornerstone of the great monarchies in general, the bourgeoisie has, at least since the establishment of modern industry and of the world market, conquered for itself, in the modern representative state, exclusive political sway. The executive of the modern state is but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie historically has played a most revolutionary part. The bourgeoisie, wherever it has got the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, and idyllic relations. It has piteously torn asunder the motley feudal ties that bound man to his natural superiors, and has left remaining no other nexus between man and man than naked self-interest, than callous cash payment. It has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism, in the icy water of egotistical calculation. Huh. The bourgeoisie, or the bougie, have drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, chivalrous enthusiasm, Philistine sentimentalism, in the icy waters of egotistical calculation. It has resolved personal worth into exchange value, and in place of the numberless, indefeasible chartered freedoms, it has set up that single unconscionable freedom, free trade. In one word, for exploitation, veiled by religious and political illusions, it has substituted naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. The bourgeoisie has stripped of its halo every occupation hitherto honored and looked up to with reverent awe. It has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, the man of science into its paid wage laborers. Yes, it has. The bourgeoisie has torn away from the family its sentimental veil, and has reduced the family relation to a mere money relation. The bourgeoisie has disclosed how it came to pass that the brutal display of vigor in the Middle Ages, which reactionaries so much admire, found its fitting complement in the most slothful indolence. It has been the first to show what man's activity can bring about. It has accomplished wonders far surpassing Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and Gothic cathedrals. It has conducted expeditions that put in the shade all former exoduses of nations and crusades. The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, and thereby the relations of production, and with them the whole relations of society. Conservation of the old modes of production in unaltered form was, on the contrary, the first condition of existence for all earlier industrial classes. Constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguish the bourgeoisie epoch from all earlier ones. All fixed, fast frozen relations, with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions, are swept away. All new formed ones become antiquated before they can ossify. All that is solid melts into air, all that is holy is profaned, and man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life, and his relations with his kind. The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the entire surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. The bourgeoisie has through its exploitation of the world market given a cosmopolitan character to production and consumption in every country. To the great chagrin of reactionists, it has drawn from under the feet of industry the national ground on which it stood. All old established national industries have been destroyed or are daily being destroyed. They are dislodged by new industries, whose introduction becomes a life and death question for all civilized nations by industries that no longer work up indigenous raw material, but raw material drawn from the remotest zones. Industries whose products are consumed not only at home but in every quarter of the globe. In place of the old wants satisfied by the production of the country, we find new wants requiring for their satisfaction the products of distant lands and climes. In place of the old local and national seclusion and self-sufficiency, we have intercourse in every direction, universal and interdependence of nations. And as in material, so also in intellectual production. The intellectual creations of individual nations become common property, national one-sidedness and narrow-mindedness become more and more impossible, and from the numerous national and local literatures there arises a world literature. Oh, this is a long document. Alright, we're just going to read like a few paragraphs of each section. So this is the section 2, proletarians and communists. In what relation do the communists stand to the proletarians as a whole? The communists do not form a separate party opposed to the other working class parties. They have no interest in separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. They have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. They do not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape and mold the proletarian movement. The communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only: 1. In the national struggles of the proletarians of the different countries they point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat independently of all nationality, and 2. In the various stages of development which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere present the interests of the movement as a whole. The communists, therefore, are on the one hand and the most practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country, that section which pushes forward all others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement. The immediate aim of the communists is the same as that of all other proletarian parties: formation of the proletariat into a class, overthrow of the bourgeois supremacy, conquest of political power by the proletariat. Ah, okay. So the communists want to overthrow the elite ruling class, and they want to do their own conquest into political power with the poor people leading it. Yeah, that's right. And then what? What do a bunch of poor people that rule a political power do once they gain control? This is probably why communism really doesn't ever work. The theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based on ideas or principles that have been invented or discovered by this or that would-be universal reformer. The theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based on ideas or principles that have been invented or discovered by this or that would-be universal reformer. They merely express, in general terms, actual relations springing from an existing class struggle, from a historical movement along or going in on under our very eyes, going on under our very eyes. Class struggle from a historical movement going on under our very eyes. The abolition of existing property relations is not at all a distinctive feature of communism. Oh my goodness, it's hard to read these things. To be a capitalist is to have not only a purely personal but a social status in production. Capital is a collective product, and only by the united action of many members, nay, in the last resort, only by the united action of all members of society, can it be set in motion. Well, when your only asset is your labor because you don't own anything, I mean, it's, this goes back to the feudal area, or yeah, we have the nobles and then the peasant serfs that don't own anything, but they do all the work for the nobles. So their labor is their currency that they trade for food. And that's a meager existence. I can understand rising up to destroy that, or to, have something to say about it, but what's realistically able to be done, you know? Here we are thousands of years in on our civilized society trek, and it hasn't been quite figured out yet. Let us now take wage labor. The average price of wage labor is the minimum wage, i.e., that quantum of the means of subsistence which is absolutely requisite to keep the labor in bare existence as a laborer. What, therefore, the wage laborer appropriates by means of his labor merely suffices to prolong and reproduce a bare existence. We by no means intend to abolish this personal appropriation of the products of labor, an appropriation that is made from the maintenance and reproduction of human life, and that leaves no surplus wherewith to command the labor of others. All that we want to do away with is the miserable character of this appropriation, under which the laborer lives merely to increase capital, and is allowed to live only insofar as the interests of the ruling class requires it. In bourgeois society, living labor is but a means to increase accumulated labor. In communist society, the accumulated labor is but a means to widen, to enrich, to promote the existence of the laborer. In bourgeois society, therefore, the past dominates the present. In the communist society, the present dominates the past. In bourgeois society, capital is independent and has individuality, while the living person is dependent and has no individuality. And the abolition of this state of things is called by the bourgeois abolition of individuality and freedom. And rightly so. The abolition of bourgeois individuality, bourgeois independence, and bourgeois freedom is undoubtedly aimed at. By freedom is meant, under the present bourgeois conditions of the production, free trade, free selling, and buying. But if selling and buying disappears, free selling and buying disappears also. This talk about free selling and buying and all the other brave words of our bourgeois about freedom in general have a meaning, if any, only in contrast with restricted selling and buying, with the fettered traders of the Middle Ages, but have no meaning when opposed to the communistic abolition of buying and selling, of the bourgeois conditions of production, and the bourgeois itself. You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property, but in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. Its existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of those 9/10. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary condition for those for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. In one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so, that is just what we intend. From the moment when labor can no longer be converted into capital, money, or rent into a social power capable of being monopolized, i.e., from the moment when individual property can no longer be transformed into bougie property, into capital, from that moment you say individuality vanishes. Alright, let's check on... Alright, so nevertheless, in most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable. 1. Abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. 2. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax. 3. Abolition of rights of inheritance. 4. Confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. 5. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. 6. Centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. 7. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of waste lands, and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. 8. Equal liability of all to work, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. 9. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of all the distinction between town and country by a more equable distribution of the populace over the country. And 10. Free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children's factory labor in its present form, combination of education with industrial production. This is the proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest by degree all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e., of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to increase the total productive forces as rapidly as possible. So seize the power and the wealth and authority from the bourgeoisie and give it to the proletariat class, and have this party do all these things listed here. That in itself is a little bit scary. Socialist and communist literature, reactionary socialism, feudal socialism. Owing to their historical position, it became the vocation of the aristocracies of France and England to write pamphlets against modern bourgeois society. In the French Revolution of July 1830, And in the English Reform agitation, these aristocracies again succumbed to the hateful upstart. Thenceforth a serious political struggle was altogether out of the question. A literary battle alone remained possible, but even in the domain of literature the old cries of the Restoration period had become impossible. In order to arouse sympathy, the aristocracy was obliged to lose sight, apparently, of its own interests and to formulate their indictment against the bourgeoisie in the interests of the exploited working class alone. Thus the aristocracy took their revenge by singing lampoons on their new masters and whispering in his ears sinister prophecies of coming catastrophe. In this way arose feudal socialism, half lamentation, half lampoon, half an echo of the past and half a menace of the future, at times, by its bitter, witty, and incisive criticism, striking the bourgeoisie to the very heart's core, but always ludicrous in its effect, through total incapacity to comprehend the march of modern history. The aristocracy, in order to rally the people to them, waved the proletarian alms bag in front for a banner. But the people so often as it joined them, saw their hindquarters, the old feudal coats of arms, and deserted with loud and irreverent laughter. One section of French legitimists and Young England exhibited this spectacle. In pointing out that their mode of exploitation was different to that of the bourgeoisie, the feudalists forget that they exploited under circumstances and conditions that were quite different and that are now antiquated. In showing that, under their rule, the modern proletariat never existed, they forget that the modern bourgeoisie is the necessary offspring of their own form of society. For the rest, so little do they conceal the reactionary character of their criticism that their chief accusation against the bougie amounts to this, that under the bourgeois regime a class is being developed which is destined to cut up root and branch the old order of society. What they upbraided the bourgeoisie with its not so much What they upbraided the bourgeoisie with is not so much that it creates a proletariat as that it creates a revolutionary proletariat. In political practice, therefore, they join in all coercive measures against the working class and in ordinary life. Despite their highfalutin phrases, they stoop to pick up the golden apples dropped from the tree of industry, and to barter truth, love, and honor for traffic in wool, beetroot sugar, and potato spirits. As the parson has ever gone hand in hand with the landlords, so has clerical socialism with feudal socialism. Petty bougie socialism. The feudal aristocracy was not the only class that was ruined by the bourgeoisie, not the only class whose conditions of existence pined and perished in the atmosphere of modern bourgeoisie society. The medieval burgesses and the small peasant proprietors were the persecutors or the precursors of the modern bourgeoisie. In those countries which are but little developed industrially and commercially, these two classes still vegetate side by side with the rising bourgeoisie. In countries where modern civilization has become fully developed, a new class of petty bourgeoisie has been formed, fluctuating between proletariat and bourgeoisie and ever renewing itself as a supplementary part of bourgeoisie society. The individual members of this class, however, are being constantly hurled down into the proletariat by the action of competition, and as modern industry develops, they even see the moment approaching when they will completely disappear as an independent section of modern society to be replaced in manufactures, agriculture, and commerce by overlookers, bailiffs, and shopmen. German or true socialism, the socialist and communist literature of France, a literature that originated under the pressure of a bourgeoisie in power, and that was the expressions of the struggle against this power, was introduced into Germany at a time when the bourgeoisie in that country had just begun its contest with feudal absolutism, or feudal absolutism. German philosophers, would-be philosophers, and beaux esprits, men of letters, eagerly seized on this literature, only forgetting that when these writings immigrated from France into Germany, French social conditions had not immigrated along with them. In contact with German social conditions, this French literature lost all of its immediate practical significance and assumed a purely literary aspect. Thus, to the German philosophers of the 18th century, the demands of the First French Revolution were nothing more than the demands of practical reason in general, and the utterance of the will of the revolutionary French bourgeoisie signified, in their eyes, the laws of pure will, of will as it was bound to be, of true human will generally. The work of the German literati consisted solely in bringing the new French ideas into harmony with their ancient philosophical conscience, or rather, in annexing the French ideas without deserting their own philosophic point of view. This annexation took place in the same way in which a foreign language is appropriated, namely by translation. It is well known how the monks wrote the silly lives of Catholic saints over the manuscripts on which the classical works of ancient heathendom had been written. The German literati reversed this process with the profane French literature. They wrote their philosophical nonsense beneath the French original. For instance, beneath the French criticism of the economic functions of money, they wrote alienation of humanity, and beneath the French criticism of the bourgeoisie, they wrote dethronement of the category of the general, and so forth. The introduction of these philosophical phrases at the back of the French historical criticisms they dubbed philosophy of action, true socialism, German science of socialism, philosophical foundations of socialism, and so on. The French socialists and communist literature was thus completely emasculated, and since it ceased in the hands of the Germans to express the struggle of one class with the other, he felt conscious of having overcome French one-sidedness and of representing not true requirements, but the requirements of truth, not the interests of the proletariat, but the interests of human nature, of man in general, who belongs to no class, has no reality, who exists only in the misty realm of philosophical fantasy. This German socialism, which took its schoolboy task so seriously and solemnly, and extolled its poor stock in trade in such a mountebank fashion, meanwhile gradually lost its pedantic innocence. Okay, I'm back. I had to take a little break. So I'm still looking at the Communist Manifesto, and we're going to take a look at some questions and answers. So these are either from Marx or this Engels guy in the 1800s, I'm assuming. I didn't read too much about the backstory of these questions and answers. I just want to see, since they're part of the Communist Manifesto, I want to know what's what's the aim, what's the goal, what's going on here. And then we're going to look at the Marxism Wiki, and I'm going to wrap it up with some of my own thoughts. So, a communist confession of faith. Question 1, are you a communist? Answer is yes. Question 2, what is the aim of the communists? The answer is to organize society in such a way that every member of it can develop and use all his capabilities and powers in complete freedom and without thereby infringing the basic conditions of this society. That seems very interesting because is not the one of the goals of communism to overthrow the bourgeoisie ruling class and set up for itself a system of ruling unto itself? Uh, I'm not really sure how that would work and still offer complete freedom without infringing the basic conditions of society. If you're doing a division of labor and wealth equally, I mean, you can. It seems like you can set standards however you want to in an arbitrary way, and then there's a lot of room for um, what's the word? Corruption, I guess you could. Yeah. Not that there's not already corruption with this elite class and all that, but I still don't see how communism is a cure for anything. It just seems like more of the same with more equally distributed poverty for all, in my opinion. So question 3 is, how do you wish to achieve this aim? Answer by the elimination of private property and its replacement by community of property. So nobody owns anything and everyone's going to be happy. Is this not what we're talking about in today's day and age with Charles Schwab and his economic forum and the Davos crew and all this? Question 4, on what do you base your community of property? Answer is firstly on the mass of productive forces and means of subsistence resulting from the development of industry, agriculture, trade, and colonization, and on the possibility inherent in machinery, chemical, and other resources of their infinite extension. Secondly, on the fact that the consciousness or feeling of every individual there exists certain irrefutable basic principles which, being the result of the whole historical development, require no proof. Hmm. That's a mouthful of an answer. I'm not really sure if they even answered anything. What do you base your community of property? The mass of productive forces and means of subsistence resulting from the development of industry, agriculture, trade, and colonization. So I guess everybody in the community has a right to own productive forces and a mean of subsistence. It's not clicking for me, sir. What are such principles? Irrefutable basic principles which, being the result of the whole historical development requirement. For example, every individual strives to be happy. The happiness of the individual is inseparable from the happiness of all, etc. How do you wish to prepare the way for your community of property? By enlightening and uniting the proletariat. So the working class, the salt of the earth, the would-be's, the working average Joes, the blue collars. What is the proletariat? The proletariat is a class of society which lives exclusively by its labor and not on the profit from any kind of capital. That class whose weal and woe, whose life and death therefore depend on the alternation of times of good and bad business, in a word, on the fluctuations of competition. Then there have not always been proletarians? No, there have always been poor and working classes, and those who worked were almost always the poor, but there have not always been proletarians, just as competition has not always been free. How did the proletariat arise? The proletariat came into being as a result of the introduction of machines which have been invented since the middle of the last century, and the most important of which are the steam engine, the spinning machine, and the power loom. These machines, which are very expensive and could therefore only be purchased by rich people, supplanted the workers of the time, because by the use of machinery it was possible to produce commodities more quickly and cheaply than could the workers with their imperfect spinning wheels and hand looms. The machines thus delivered industry entirely into the hands of the big capitalists and rendered the workers scanty property, which consisted mainly of their tools, looms, etc., quite worthless, so that the capitalist was left with everything, the worker with nothing. In this way, the factory system was introduced. So he makes some good points here. With each subsequent revolution, industrial revolution, the way I see it, we've had four of them at this point since the middle of the 1700s. You saw it first with the creation of the steam engine, and then, you had factories come on board, and then um, the second revolution would have been with things like automobiles and car manufacturing assembly lines, where things started becoming more and more mass produced. Cars were built with interchangeable parts, um, and then the third one I would say, around 1950s, middle of the 20th century, you see this idea of the information age, everything revolving around the trade and exchange of information and the proliferation of computer systems throughout. And then now we have this so-called fourth industrial revolution where, going beyond that, everything has a internet access. You have this internet of things, and now you enter artificial intelligence into that mix, and you can see that each subsequent industrial revolution built upon what the one previous to it set forth. So factories and things, commodities and goods and things were made more quickly, needing less human effort, starting with the steam engine. And now, fast forward to today with this artificial intelligence, we've gone from making physical things, uh, human beings being uh, less and less needed to make physical things, and now we're going to where human beings are less and less needed to do intellectual things, because artificial intelligence, it can perform math calculations at a PhD level in seconds, and it can write Mozart poetry and this, that, and the other, music and all that. You know, it can do things on a mental capacity that would take most humans, some time and effort, but it's able to pull off of uh, decades of data that has been entered into the cloud, the internet, by all these Internet of Things and scientific analysis and journals and knowledge base, and it's become a conscious encyclopedia in the most basic of terms. So some things to think about there. So where are humans left at the end of this road that we're currently traveling? Some interesting things to think about with that. What's what's the end goal overall of artificial intelligence, and what could possibly come after artificial intelligence? Once the automobile went as far as it could go, we started thinking about electric vehicles and the potentialities of flying vehicles, etc. So now we've got computers, and then we have the internet. Now we've got artificial intelligence, and it's just barreling down the hill, snowball effect. Where where does this lead? Where was I? Once the capitalists saw how advantageous this was for them, they sought to expand it in more and more branches of labor. They divided work more and more between the workers, so that workers who formerly had made a whole article now produced only a part of it. That goes back again, same concept as the automobile assembly line. Starting out, human beings did multiple parts of the job, and then, as it gets more and more advanced, you have less humans doing less things, and human jobs are reduced to just putting one part on, and then now you've got robotic arms doing the majority of the labor, and just a handful of engineers walking around in lab coats, making sure the robots are uh, pretty much quality control, and engineers like that, just making sure that the robots stay on task. Labor simplified in this way produced goods more quickly, therefore more cheaply, and only now was it found in almost every branch of labor that here also machines could be used. As soon as any branch of labor went over to factory production, it ended up, just as in the case of the spinning and weaving, uh, in the hands of the big capitalists, and the workers were deprived of the last remnants of their independence. We have gradually arrived at the position where almost all branches of labor are run on a factory basis. This has increasingly brought about the ruin of the previously existing middle class, especially now. This is back in the 1800s. They're talking about the ruination of the middle class. Are we not kind of seeing some of the same things going on today? Artificial intelligence is supplanting the middle class in a big way. All of a sudden now you've got a bunch of white collar jobs that used to pay $100,000+ a year. A lot of people's being laid off on account of this. Completely transformed previous positions of the workers, and two new classes, which are gradually swallowing up all other classes, have come into being, namely the class of the big capitalists, who in all advanced countries are in almost exclusive possessions of the means of subsistence, and those means being machines, factories, and workshops, etc., which these means of subsistence are produced. This is the bougie class, or the bourgeoisie. And then you have the class of the completely propertyless, the serfs, the plebs, the proletariats, who are compelled to sell their labor to the first class, the bougie, simply to obtain from them in return their means of subsistence. Slavery, in other words, since the parties to this trading in labor are not equal, but the bougie have the advantage, the propertyless must submit to the bad conditions laid down by the bougie. This class, independent or dependent on the bougie, is called the class of the proletarians, or the proletariat. Question number 10. In what way does the proletarian differ from the slave? The answer is, the slave is sold once and for all, and the proletarian has to sell himself by the day and by the hour. The slave is the property of one master, and for that very reason has a guaranteed subsistence, however wretched it may be. The proletarian is, so to speak, the slave of the entire bougie class, not of one master, and therefore has no guaranteed subsistence, since nobody buys his labor if he does not need it. The slave is accounted a thing and not a member of civil society. The proletarian is recognized as a person, as a member of civil society. The slave may therefore have a better subsistence than the proletarian, but the latter stands at a higher stage of development. The slave frees himself by becoming a proletarian, abolishing from the totality of property relationships only the relationship of slavery. The proletarian can free himself only by abolishing property in general. That's pretty interesting. It's kind of like that today, where if you're not the owner of a company, or at least, middle upper management, pretty high up there somewhere in corporate office, you're kind of a proletariat yourself, you know, a rat on a wheel, driving back and forth in rush hour traffic, punching your clock, pecking away at the reports and the numbers on the screen, and making sure that the doody dobby dooby lie emails get sent, and all this baloney that the 21st century has us doing. It's ridiculous, if you ask me. It's absolutely ridiculous. You know, there's a book called Bullshit Jobs. I can't remember the name of the author, but it's pretty good. It does a pretty in-depth study on the overall uselessness of a vast majority of jobs. You know, you got your plumbers and your construction workers and people that fix things, handymen and this, that, and the other, you know, roofers and whatnot. People that, electricians, people that keep this infrastructure, you know, updated and in good working order. You know, those are meaningful jobs. Those benefit the vast majority of humans in civil society. But then you got people that go into an office and they push a bunch of papers around and they send emails and they have meetings about meetings and they have board discussions and they do conferences and you know they talk on the phone a lot, but what are they really doing? You know, what's really going on in there that has any significant value? I've never understood it, and I could never work in one of those positions because I just could not understand the uh, the picture of it. The big picture overall just seemed pointless to me. Let's see, where are we at? The serf has the use. What ways does a proletarian differ from the serf? The serf has the use of a piece of land, that is, of an instrument of production, in return for handling over a greater or lesser portion of the yield. So the serf differs from the proletarian in such that he's allowed to use land, he's allowed to cultivate and farm the land and produce agriculture, and he gives a portion of it away, and he's able to keep a portion of it for himself. That's his lot. Proletarians are literally just exchanging their time and labor for some monetary sustenance that he then has to go and trade for valuable things like food and shelter and stuff. It's you know, it's that kind of like what we got going on today. You know, you go get your paycheck, it's fiat money. It's only is the value is only what everybody collectively places on it. It's not backed by anything. I mean, you can argue oil and stuff, but it used to be gold, and then who knows what it'll be in the future. And you know, serfdom is more of a bartering lifestyle, and proletarian is more of a rat race kind of lifestyle. And then if you're a slave, you know, you're lucky to get the bottom of the barrel slops that are left over from everyone else. Anyway, the proletarian works with instruments of production which belongs to someone else, who in return for his labor hands over to him a portion determined by competition of the products. In the case of the serf, the share of the labor is determined by his own labor, that is, by himself. In the case of the proletarian, it is determined by competition, therefore, in the first place, by the bougie. The serf has guaranteed subsistence, the proletarian has not. The serf frees himself by driving out his feudal lord and becoming a property owner himself, thus entering into competition and joining for the time being the possessing class, the privileged class. The proletarian frees himself by doing away with property, competition, and all class differences. In other words, adopting communism, rising up in labor revolts, and demanding higher wages and going on strikes and stuff. In what way how many more questions we got? I don't know if I'm going to read all these. I'm going to start skipping around and just seeing what. Let's see. Do you not believe that community of property has been possible at any time? No, communism has only arisen since machinery and other inventions made it possible to hold out the prospect of an all-sided development, a happy existence for all members of society. Communism is the theory of a liberation which was not possible for the slaves, the serfs, or the handicraftsmen, but only for the proletarians, and hence it belongs of necessity to the 19th century and was not possible in any earlier period. Let me go back to the sixth question. as you wish to prepare for community of property by the enlightening and uniting of the proletariat, then you reject revolution? Answer, we are convinced not only of the uselessness, but even of the harmfulness of all conspiracies. We are also aware that revolutions are not made deliberately and arbitrarily, but that everywhere and at all times they are the necessary consequences of circumstances which are not in any way whatever dependent on either on the will or the leadership of the individual parties or of whole classes. But we also see the development of the proletariat in almost all countries of the world is forcibly repressed by the possessing classes, and then that thus a revolution is being forcibly worked for by the opponents of communism. If in the end the oppressed proletariat is thus driven into a revolution, then we will defend the cause of the proletariat just as well by our deeds as now by our words. Do you intend to replace the existing social order by community of property at one stroke? We have no such intention. The development of the masses cannot be ordered by decree. It is determined by the development of the conditions in which these masses live, and therefore proceeds gradually. How do you think the transition from the present situation to community of property is to be effective? The first fundamental condition for the introduction of community of property is the political liberation from the proletariat through a democratic constitution. That sounds familiar. What will be your first measure once you have established democracy? Guaranteeing the subsistence of the proletariat. How will you do this? By limiting private property in such a way that it gradually prepares the way for its transformation into social property. Example, by progressive taxation, limitation on the right of inheritance in favor of the state, etc., etc. So a man goes and works all his life and buys property for his family to inherit after he dies. They want to make that a thing of the past. Is that the goal? So you work all your life, you live on your property, and then it goes back to the state when you die. So you really don't own anything, and there's no generational wealth under this system of governance. Everything is controlled and centrally operated by the state. Is that not the road that America is going down to this day with this own nothing and be happy philosophy? Not just America, I think they want to spread this doctrine throughout the whole world. I think this is part of this New World Order and the collective governance under the one world system, where nobody owns anything. There's no inherited land or property, and everything is just rented, you know. Let's see. By employing workers in national workshops and factories and on national estates, by educating all children at the expense of the state. How will you arrange this kind of education during the period of transition? All children will be educated in state establishments from the time when they can do without the first maternal care. So around kindergarten age. Will not the introduction of community of property be accompanied by the proclamation of the community of women? By no means. We will only interfere in the personal relationships between men and women, or with the family in general, to the extent that the maintenance of the existing institution would disrupt the new social order. Besides, we are very well aware that the family relationship has been modified in the course of history by the property relationships and by periods of development, and that consequently the ending of private property will also have a most important influence on it. Will nationalities continue to exist under communism? That's an interesting question. The nationalities of the peoples who join together according to the principle of the community will be just as much compelled by this union to merge with one another and thereby supersede themselves as the various differences between estates and classes disappear through the superseding of their basis, private property. Do communists reject existing religions? Answer: all religions which have existed hitherto were expressions of historical stages of development of individual peoples or groups of peoples, but communism is that stage of historical development which makes all existing religions superfluous, and supersedes them. In the name and on the mandate of the Congress. Okay, so that's not part of it. So, do communists reject existing religion? Communism is that stage of historical development which makes all existing religions superfluous. It's hard to say that word. And it supersedes them. Very interesting. Alright, so if you want to read this whole thing, it's 68 pages, and I've got some other things I want to look at on Wikipedia. Particularly, I want to look at some of the people and their histories involved. So, Marxism is a method of socio-economic analysis that uses a materialist interpretation of historical development, better known as historical materialism, which is Karl Marx theory, locates historical change in the rise of class societies and the way humans labor together to make their livelihoods. Let's see. To understand class relations and social conflict, a dialectical perspective to view social transformation. Dialectical method refers originally to dialogue between people holding different points of view about a subject but wishing to arrive to the truth through reasoned argumentation. Okay. Karl Marx, German-born philosopher, economist, historian, sociologist, political theorist, journalist, critic of political economy, and revolutionary socialist. From what I understand, Karl Marx was, he died a poor man. He lived as a poor man, and he died a poor man. He studied at the universities of Bonn, Berlin, and Jena, receiving a doctorate of philosophy, 1841. Let's see, childhood and early education. He was born May 5th, 1818. Let's see. He was born at Bruckengrasse, 664 in Trier, an ancient city then part of the Kingdom of Prussia's province of the Lower Rhine. Marx's family was originally non-religious Jewish, but had converted formally to Christianity before his birth. His maternal grandfather was a Dutch rabbi, so he had some Jewish roots, converted to Christianity. His father, as a child known as Herschel, was the first in the line to receive a secular education. He became a lawyer with a comfortably upper middle class income, and the family owned a number of Moselle vineyards. Huh. Largely non-religious, Heinrich. Who's Heinrich? Oh, Heinrich Marx was the father of Karl. Alright. I thought that's what I was reading. Heinrich was a man of the Enlightenment. Classic liberal, he took part in agitation for a constitution and reforms in Prussia, which was then an absolute monarchy. Little is known of Marx's childhood. The third of 9 children, he became the eldest son when his brother Moritz died in 1819. Marx and his surviving siblings, Sophie, Hermann. Yeah, he was probably educated until his father, or by his father, until 1830 when he entered Trier High School, whose headmaster Hugo Weithenbach was a friend of his father. By employing many liberal humanists as teachers, Weithenbach incurred the anger of the local conservative government. Subsequently, police raided the school in 1832 and discovered that literature espousing political liberalism was being distributed among the students. Considering the distribution of such material a seditious act, the authorities instituted reforms and replaced several staff during Marx's attendance. Marx traveled to University of Bonn, wishing to study philosophy and literature, but his father insisted on law as a more practical field. Don't go in the arts. You'll starve to death. Get a real job. Be a lawyer. Find a nice girl. Be a lawyer. Practice law. Get into politics. Settle down. Stay away from the arts. Let's see. Due to a condition referred to as a weak chest, Marx was excused from military duty when he turned 18. While at the University of Bonn, Marx joined the Poets Club, a group containing political radicals that were monitored by the police. Marx also joined the Trier Tavern Club drinking society, where many ideas were discussed, and at one point he served as the club's co-president. Additionally, Marx was involved in certain disputes, some of which he became serious. 1836, he took part in a duel with a member of the university's Borussian Corps. Although his grades in the first term were good, they soon deteriorated, leading his father to force a transfer to the more serious and academic University of Berlin. So journalism. Marx was writing both fiction and nonfiction. Marx was considering an academic career, but his path was barred by the government's growing opposition to classical liberalism at the young Hegelians. Marx moved to Cologne in 1842, where he became a journalist, writing on the radical newspaper Rheinische Zuntig Rhineland News, expressing his early views on socialism and his developing interest in economics. Marx criticized the right-wing European governments as well as figures in the liberal and socialist movements whom he thought ineffective or counterproductive. The newspaper attracted the attention of Prussian government censors. The Prussian government was really heavy-handed on their people when they had all these ideals. Checked every issue for seditious material before printing, which Marx lamented. Our newspaper has to be presented to the police to be sniffed at, and if the police smells anything unchristian or un-Prussian, the newspaper is not allowed to appear. After the Zeitung published an article strongly criticizing the Russian monarchy, Tsar Nicholas I requested it be banned, and Prussia's government complied. Oh, they banned the whole newspaper? That's crazy. Marx became co-editor of a new radical left-wing, radical left-wing partisan newspaper. So he was a lefty. Probably means the same as it does today. Let's see. Okay, here we go. 1884, he met the German socialist Friedrich Engels at a cafe, beginning a lifelong friendship. Engels showed Marx his recently published Condition of the Working Class in England in 1844, convincing Marx that the working class would be the agent and instrument of the final revolution in history. That is some bold statements. Soon Marx and Engels were collaborating on a criticism of the philosophical ideas of Marx's former friend Bruno Bauer. This work was published in 1845 as The Holy Family. The Holy Family is a book written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in November 1844. This book is a critique of the young Hegelians, whatever that is, and their trend of thought, which was very popular in academic circles at the time. I think I need to get this book. The title is a suggestion by the publisher and is meant. Oh, the title was a suggestion by the publisher and is meant as a sarcastic reference to the Bauer brothers and their supporters. The book created a controversy with much of the press and caused Bruno Bauer to refute the book in an article which was published in Huygens Vertenschaft in 1845. Bauer claimed that Marx and Engels misunderstood what he was saying. Marx later replied in his response with his own article that was published in the journal, whatever that word is, in January 1846. How many letters is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 letters for whatever this word is. Gesellschaftsspiegel. Gesellschaftsspiegel. Marx also discussed the argument in Chapter 2 of the German Ideology. During Engels' short stay in Paris, Marx suggested that they should write together a critique of the rage of their day, the young Hegelians, while Marx suggested they should write together a critique of the rage of the day, which would be the young Hegelians. While accomplishing their plan, the first joint writing project between the two men was accomplished and thus the beginning of their friendship. After conversing, they began drawing up plans for a book about the young Hegelians' trend of thought, very popular in academic circles. So I'm not really sure what this Hegelian stuff is. Okay, so the young Hegelians or left Hegelians, Linkshegeliner, or the Hegelian left, were a group of German intellectuals who, in the decade or so after the death of George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel in 1831, reacted to and wrote about his ambiguous legacy. Let's see. Another young Hegelian. So Karl Marx was one of them. He was first sympathetic with this strategy of attacking Christianity to undermine the Prussian establishment, but later formed divergent ideas and broke with the young Hegelians, attacking their views in works such as the German Ideology. Marx concluded that religion is not the basis of the establishment's power, but rather ownership of capital. I would say that's true. He who controls the money controls the world. What was it that was it J.P. Morgan or Rothschild or somebody? He said, "Give me control of the money, and I care not who makes the laws." And church and state seems to always have a pretty big hand in how things are run. And then you mix the money in there with it, and it gets crazy. So let's see. Ownership of capital, processes that employ technologies, land, money, and especially human labor power to create surplus value lie at the heart of the establishment's power. Marx and Engels considered religion as a component of the ideological superstructure of societies and a pre-rational mode of thought which nonetheless was wielded by ruling elites to obscure social relationships, including the true basis of political power. In this latter sense, he describes religion as the opium of the people. That's crazy. I mean, it makes sense, but that's wild. Let's see. That's about the group. Okay, here's philosophy. Marx would not accept that the state was the seat of universality and rationality. Example, it was inherently rational. And he made it his goal to prove that the difference between civil society, which Hegel had held to be the sphere where individual interest is pursued in conflict with the interests of others and the state, where such conflicts are transcended, was in fact misplaced. The goal of the proletariat being, in fact, to abolish such differences. Other young Hegelians had other qualms about Hegel's philosophy. David Strauss did not accept Hegel's claims of Christianity David Strauss did not accept Hegel's claims of Christian historicity, renouncing any historical basis to Christianity in favor of its demythification, claiming that the stories found in the Bible should be understood as myths constructed not by individuals but by the earliest Christian communities in response to the teaching of Christ and the messianic tradition which they had inherited from the Old Testament. So maybe I need to understand Hegel's philosophy a little better. Hegel's philosophical system is divided into three parts: the science of logic, the philosophy of nature, and the philosophy of spirit, the latter two of which together constitute the real philosophy. Quote, quote. The structure is adopted from Proclus's Neoplatonic triad of remaining, procession, return, and from the Christian Trinity. Although evident in draft writings dating back to as early as 1805, the system was not completed in published form until the 1817 Encyclopedia, first edition. Frederick C. Beezer argues that the position of the logic with respect to the real philosophy is best understood in terms of Hegel's appropriation of Aristotle's distinction between the order of explanation and the order of being. To Beezer, Hegel is neither a Platonist who believes in abstract logical entities or a nominalist, according to whom the particular is first in the orders of explanation and being alike. Rather, Hegel is a holist. For Hegel, the universal is always first in the order of explanation, even if what is naturally particular is the first in the order of being. With respect to the system as a whole, that universal is supplied by the logic. Michael J. Inwood plainly states the logical idea is non-temporal and therefore does not exist in any time apart from its manifestations. To ask when it divides into nature and spirit is analogous to asking when 12 divides into 5 and 7. You're losing me, dude. You're starting to lose me. This is I struggle with philosophy. I mean, I don't know, just I don't get it. I don't get it. The question does not have an answer because it is predicated upon a fundamental misunderstanding of its terms. What question? Let me start over. Michael J. Inwood plainly states the logical idea is non-temporal and therefore does not exist at any time apart from its manifestations. So, a logical idea does not exist unless it's manifested. How's it manifested? To ask when it divides into nature and spirit is analogous to asking when 12 divides into 5 and 7. The question does not have an answer because it is predicated upon a fundamental misunderstanding of its terms. The task of logic, as at this high systemic level, is to articulate what Hegel calls the identity of identity and non-identity of nature and spirit. The identity of identity and non-identity of nature and spirit. Put another way, yes please, is there a simpler way? Is there a way that makes sense? Is there a situation in which this freaking paragraph makes any sense? It aims to overcome subject-object dualism. This is to say that, among other things, Hegel's philosophical project endeavors to provide the metaphysical basis for an account of spirit that is continuous with yet distinct from the merely natural world, without thereby reducing either term to the other. So you're talking about body and soul, body, soul, and mind, body, and spirit, that kind of thing. That might be what they're talking about when they refer to the Trinity. Hmm. I don't know. That's too philosophical and theoretical for me. That's getting way away from communism and the manifesto and the oligarchs versus the serfs. Furthermore, the final selections of Hegel's encyclopedia suggest that to give priority to another or to any one of its three parts is to have an interpretation that is one-sided, incomplete, or otherwise inaccurate. As Hegel famously declares, the true is the whole. Right. I'm not going to read too much I'm not going to read any deeper into that. Let's go back to are we still on Marx? Yeah. Marx's view of history, which came to be called historical materialism, controversially adapted as the philosophy of dialectical materialism by Engels and Lenin, certainly shows the influence of Hegel's claim that one should view reality and history dialectically. However, whereas Hegel had thought in idealist in terms he had thought in idealist terms, putting ideas in the forefront, Marx sought to conceptualize uh, dialectics in materialist terms, arguing for the primacy of matter over idea. Where Hegel saw the spirit as driving history, Marx saw this as an unnecessary mystification, obscuring the reality of humanity and its physical actions shaping the world. He wrote that Hegelianism stood the movement of reality on its head, and that one needed to set it upon its feet. Despite his dislike of mystical terms, Marx used Gothic language in several of his works. In the Communist Manifesto, he proclaims a specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise the specter, and the capital he refers to in the capital he refers to capital as necromancy that surrounds the products of labor. This is interesting. So he's referring to communism as a specter or a ghost, a ghoul, you know, a spirit or some kind. And then he calls capital necromancy, which is to say the practice of magical sorcery involving communication between the dead by summoning the spirits as apparitions. That's some crazy thought right there. Communism is a spirit, and capital is a. Well, is he saying that participating in the economy, trading of capital and stuff, is practicing necromancy? Interesting to think about. Though inspired by French socialists and sociological thought, Marx criticized utopian socialists, arguing that their favored small-scale socialistic communities would be bound to marginalization and poverty, and that only a large-scale change in the economic system could bring about real change. Other important contributions to Marx's revision of Hegelianism came from Engels' book, The Condition of the Working Class in England in 1844, which led Marx to conceive of the historical dialectic in terms of class conflict, and to see the modern working class as the most progressive force of revolution, as well as from the social democratic Frederick Wilhelm Schulz, who in whatever these words are, Die Beurwang der Produktion, described the movement of society as flowing from the contradiction between the forces of production and the mode of production. Marx believed that he could study history and society scientifically, discerning tendencies of his history and thereby predicting the outcomes of social conflicts. Some followers of Marx therefore concluded that a communist revolution would inevitably occur. However, Marx famously asserted in the 11th of his thesis on Feuerbach that philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it, and he clearly dedicated himself to trying to alter the world. Marx's theories inspired several theories and disciplines of future, including but not limited to contemporary critique of political economy, whatever this is, Kondratieve wave, hypothesized cycle-like phenomena in the modern world economy. Huh. Kunet swing, crisis theory, quantitative economic history, world systems theory, under consumption. All right, so we're gonna stop here. I want to do a part 2 where I go a little bit more in depth in some of these peripheral concepts. According to Marx, I want to look at the book he wrote with Engels. I want to dig a little bit deeper in the Hegel philosophy and look into some of these other ideas he's got, crisis theory and stuff like that. But I'm going to stop it here and we'll pick it up in the next one.